Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Always good to have him with us. Alfred University Political Science Professor Emeritus, Dr. Robert A. Heineman.
You're too kind, Brian. You're just too kind.
You know, you're going to be part of this lineup with the Kevin Dorn replay shows.
Oh, I see.
We're pulling one from 1998.
Okay, well, it's good to give our audience a little heads up, and I'm honored to be following Bill O'Reilly on the Newsmaker program.
Wasn't he good?
Yes, he was. Yes.
He and Eric both. Impeachment, can I tell you what Mark Levin said?
It's your show.
Quote, Nancy Pelosi was apparently advised by left-wing Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe to delay sending impeachment to the Senate, so she is unilaterally sitting on the impeachment. Here's what Judge Napolitano said. He does not know if the Senate can take up articles of impeachment and proceed with a trial without Nancy Pelosi sending them over, as this has never happened, Napolitano says. But the judge says Trump is entitled to a trial to seek his exoneration, and it's up to the Senate to determine how to proceed. Your thoughts?
Well, I think first and foremost, Pelosi and Schumer are working very closely together. And again, if you look at this whole effort as an attempt to besmirch Trump and try to undercut his popularity in the 2020 election, then it makes sense for Pelosi and Schumer to work together to try to embarrass and drag this out as long as they can. And, of course, Pelosi has said that she may not be sending these over to the Senate unless she gets some sort of obligation or commitment from the Senate to do things fairly. I mean, this is a woman that's just come off one of the most, frankly, unfair efforts seen in a long time. But nonetheless, she's trying to use this as some sort of leverage. I do think that the Senate really can't do anything unless they are presented with articles of impeachment. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows them to just go out on their own and reach into the House and say, well, now we'll take these up. I think the House has to forward them to the Senate, and I believe the House has to vote on this. Now, if that's the case, Pelosi's going to run into some serious problems there, because at this point, the House and Senate both want to go home. I mean, we got the Christmas break coming up. These guys want to leave. And so if she thinks she's going to hold on to it until afterward, I guess she can do that. But I don't think the Senate, frankly, again, there's nothing in the Constitution. The Constitution simply says the House impeaches, and then later in another section of the Constitution talks about in terms of the president and the Senate needing two-thirds of those present to convict. So I think in that sense, the Senate really can't act at this point. Now, again, the Senate and the House don't get along that well anyway. You got all kinds of institutional hubris involved here, and so that's a problem, whether you're all Republicans or all Democrats. But it's even more of a problem, of course, when the House is controlled by the Democrats and the Senate's controlled by the Republicans. So you got a combination of things here that's frankly going to make the Senate, I think, pretty angry.
I think Senator Mitch McConnell said this whole thing is unprecedented.
Well, obviously it's unprecedented. That's a given. But the Senate does have, quite a bit of leeway in how they want to proceed. I think it would be foolish, frankly, for them to proceed until the House has actually officially informed them that the president has, in fact, been impeached. So we'll just have to wait and see on this. Now, I think in terms of the larger picture here and the threat to American constitutional structure.
Can I say something?
Well, go right ahead.
Well, it's funny you said the word that you just did, threatening the setup. Judge Napolitano also says it would be dangerous to remove Trump from office without a substantial and broad national consensus to do so. We all know the consensus does not exist. At best, it's 50-50, probably slightly favoring Trump.
Well, good for Judge Napolitano. Are we... All right.
But you talked about threatening the security of the Constitution.
No, the constitutional structure. And the point I want to make here is that the Founding Fathers, the authors of the Constitution, clearly did not want a parliamentary system. So that in many of European countries, perhaps all of them, you have a parliamentary system in which the prime minister, the chancellor, the executive, whoever it happens to be, is subject to, and this does vary a little from country to country, so to say they're all this way, but certainly the British is, and is subject to the majority in Parliament. So when you lose your parliamentary majority on a vote of confidence or on some major policy issue, then very often the government will simply resign and ask for a new election, which is what Boris Johnson has just done in England. Now, he doesn't have to. England has changed their laws so that I think if you're prime minister, you're in there for 5 years. But no prime minister is going to stay in there for a full 5 years if they don't have majority support in Parliament. And at the time the Constitution was written, the Founding Fathers were very clear that they did not want a parliamentary system. And in fact, in the Constitution, it specified that an individual cannot hold two offices under the Constitution, so that you can't be a member of Congress and then end up being elected president and hold both positions at the same time. You can be a member of Congress, you can be a president. But years ago, Senator Moynihan was selected to be an elector for the Democrats, to be a presidential elector. And, of course, he couldn't do that. Electors is a constitutional position. Obviously, being a U.S. senator is as well. So he resigned the elector position. But the point here is that what we're moving toward with this impeachment effort, which is based on almost a fabricated accumulation of charges and gossip and hearsay, and because basically some of the Democrats just don't like Donald Trump, and we're going to impeach him, which they've done. And so you're moving closer and closer, I think, to a kind of parliamentary system where Congress will simply remove somebody because they don't like them. And I think that's clearly a violation of what the authors of the Constitution intended. And I think the authors of the Constitution understood that there are going to be a lot of times when Congress and the president don't get along at all. And all these claims about presidential obstruction, I mean, that's absurd. The president has every right to take different positions from Congress. So by lowering this, it moves us closer and closer to that kind of parliamentary situation where Congress can simply bounce somebody out at will. And, of course, you still have the two-thirds requirement in the Senate, and that's in the Constitution. So it's that provides a little protection. And, again, you also have the Supreme Court, the federal courts, which increasingly are becoming more sensible about constitutional issues. But it does undercut, I think, what the authors of the Constitution intended. I don't think it's by setting the bar so low, it's leading to precedents that I think in years to come we're going to wish very much we never went down that route.
You touched on a point Bill O'Reilly touched on. He said that executive or presidential privilege is what Trump has in order to not disclose every conversation that he's had. Ergo, therefore, there's no reason that Congress can impeach him, demanding that he answer questions that he does not have to because of executive privilege.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. He's got every right on that point. And since, again, in this situation, there's no crimes being charged, I just find it, it's just constructed, it's fabricated. Now, I think Mitch McConnell is talking about moving toward simply, instead of simply a dismissal, moving toward an acquittal in which the Senate would simply, by simple majority, just simply acquitting of these charges, saying, I think, basically that the president is innocent of these charges. That would be a little different from voting on whether to convict him and not ending up with a two-thirds majority, it's hard to tell what you would end up with there. I don't think you'd even get a majority to try to convict Trump. But moving toward an acquittal situation, I think, kind of gives the House a bit of a slap in the face, saying, "Hey, you guys are, totally out of order." But Pelosi may well be trying to leverage her situation there, saying, "We'll just hold this over your head till you agree to do things kind of the way we want them done." I don't think that's going to go too far with McConnell.
McConnell did not start out as a friend of Trump, but he's become one recently. What do you think caused that?
Well, I think, again, a lot of people didn't like Trump. I think a lot of people don't like him today. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at what he's done, he certainly has delivered and tried to deliver on what he said he would do. And in terms of cutting back on regulations, in terms of coming up with conservative nominations to the federal courts, and I don't know what McConnell and Trump think in terms of foreign policy, but obviously he's made some major moves in that area as well. So I think McConnell, and it may well be that McConnell is sensing that there's considerable support for Trump's positions in the country and is increasingly getting on board. He has, again, what are there? There's 33 or so senators up for re-election or election this in 2020, and he wants, I think his view is a solid phalanx here is the way to go, and I think he's absolutely right. Certainly the Republicans stuck together Wednesday, and I think we'll have to see what happens in the Senate. And again, Pelosi and Schumer may think that they can begin to get somebody like Romney or Murkowski or Collins to suddenly begin to say, well, no, maybe we should do this differently. I don't think they're going to be able to pull that this time.
Jared Kushner, who I'm no expert on, but I see that the liberal media is always attacking Jared Kushner, saying that he's a hawk, even though we don't seem to be acting in hawkish ways. But anyways, cutting regulations is a big thing for President Donald Trump. Do you think that's on the advice of Jared Kushner, who is a big New York City businessman?
Well, I have no idea. I can't, I don't know.
What do you think of Kushner?
I don't think much of him at all. I know very little about him. I think he's somebody that Trump can trust, and I think he's probably a very capable person. But if you want to look at it for advisors and such, yes, I think Kushner gives a lot of advice to Trump. And
you think he's the main advisor?
I have no idea, Brian. You're asking me questions that I can't. You'll have to ask Mr. O'Reilly next time you get him on the show there.
The U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, $1.4 trillion spending bill.
Yes.
That's what they came up with.
Yes. To keep the government open, I guess probably till next October. Again, this shows kind of how the Beltway operates because in that bill are all kinds of goodies for various interest groups. And nobody obviously is paying any attention to it because all this impeachment fandango is taking up the media and the Trump haters. But in fact, in the bill, there's some remove some of the taxes on medical insurance. It removes some of the taxes on medical equipment, and provides continues to provide funding for the wall. There's a lot in there that various interest groups, little tidbits and buried away, and that's kind of the way things operate on the Beltway. You don't get a real good shot at understanding what's been done until it's all of a sudden you discover it squirreled away in a major bill, in a budget bill of $1.4 trillion. You can imagine that's a pretty thick pile of pages there that you have to pay attention to. Now, in terms of the medical issues, I see a federal appellate court here now has held that the Obamacare requirement that you have to have insurance, a mandate that you have to have health insurance, is unconstitutional. And they've sent it back to the lower courts to see if that decision then undercuts the entire Obamacare effort. So that's a serious decision there. And that might, we'll see. It may again end up in the Supreme Court. Again, as you know, I support health care for universal health care. So not that I'm an Elizabeth Warren fan, but you've got to have some way of seeing that people can get health insurance and see that it's provided for them. And this mandated approach is one way of making sure that everybody contributes. But this court has knocked it down. So,
do you want to talk about Democrats before we move on to Albany? You just touched on the topic of Elizabeth Warren. You want to talk primaries or anything before?
Well, again, I think Mr. O'Reilly's point here on the impeachment and why Schumer and Pelosi think they have to do everything they can to undercut Trump because they can see the list of candidates running for president, and at this point, their view is, I think, that none of them can beat Trump. And so it's really quite a chaotic situation there with a lot of pretty weak candidates, frankly. And somehow somebody, I guess, is going to have to emerge from the crowd, and that obviously gives Iowa and New Hampshire again a kind of a head start. Again, Bloomberg is not going to play that game. He's going to go to the big primary days and try to pick up electoral or delegates on Super Tuesdays. Well, we'll see if that works.
You've been to a lot of political meetings, and you've sat in on a lot of big political phone calls. Have you ever heard anyone say something to the effect of what you just said, that Schumer and Pelosi are saying, that our side cannot win with the candidates we have to impeach their guy?
No,
have people ever said anything like that?
No, not at all.
Do you think that Pelosi and Schumer, where they'd say, we can't win, we have to destroy the other guy, or do you think they'd say, well, he's this, and he's a racist, and he's this, and that, and blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, no, I think that, and right now Schumer's position is, well, golly, we have to have transparency. We have to have all these witnesses come forward that did not come forward before the House of Representatives, and once we get in trial mode, we can force them to appear, etc. Well, Mitch McConnell's not having any, but the point is Schumer's taking kind of a procedural approach, whereas Pelosi now is attacking Trump because he has obstructed Congress and abused his power. How he's done that exactly, it's not quite sure, but it is amazing. But in any case, they're not about to admit that what we're really trying to do here is provide a framework for the 2020 election.
Yeah, I wondered that. I wonder, because I've never been on a political meeting, except press conferences and things, but not the behind the scenes stuff. You've seen the behind the scenes stuff, Doc, and that makes you useful to me.
Glad to be useful to Brian. Yes.
Here on this show. Moving on to Albany, another Republican jumping from the state senate this time. Is the Monroe County, Orleans County, Rich Funky, Genesee County?
Monroe County, yeah.
Okay.
Rich Funky now has removed himself for re-election, so that makes in Monroe County it's Funky and Robach. I believe in Erie County Ordis from Niagara County, and Jacobs is from Erie County. So there's 4 open seats, and I believe there's one in Syracuse. Actually, there's a couple over to the east of us. One guy has stepped down to take a judgeship, and then there's another fellow simply not running. So there's 5 or 6 right now open seats. Now, as we know, the Republicans have only 23 seats to start with, so that cuts it down to 18 or so Republicans who are thinking about running for re-election. They're really piling out of there, and so the Democrats could actually get an even greater majority in the 2020 election here in New York State. It's it does not look good for the Republicans in the state Senate. I don't think there's a question about it.
An issue popped up Thursday afternoon, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it from a political science viewpoint. There, HHS rule came out of Washington, D.C. Health and Human Services is working to reject the rule. In fact, they may have just rejected it Thursday, that would allow religious adoption agencies to reject the LGBTQ parents if they apply to get an adoption through a religious organization. Governor Cuomo says he's going to fight that in New York State. They're not going to allow that in New York State. Now, I have a question for you in terms of political science. Does this help Governor Cuomo run for president? Does this hurt President Donald Trump in running for re-election?
Well, I think the religious groups are an essential core of Trump's constituency. I don't think there's any question about that. And I don't know quite how you phrased that, Brian, so I don't know where we're coming out on this regulation. So there's a federal regulation that says that.
Well, what they want to do apparently is roll back, get rid of the Obama era rule that religious adoption agencies had to give babies away for adoption to LGBTQ families.
Well, or put the other way, you couldn't exclude
right.
a claimant just because they happen to be gay or lesbian, right?
Right.
Right. And these religious groups don't want to do that. So the issue is the Trump administration is removing that requirement that they can't make that distinction.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
That's what Trump's working to do. Does that help Cuomo? Does that hurt Trump, or the reverse? What's that do?
I don't know. I suppose it helps Cuomo in New York State in the sense that he'll fight that. And again, I don't, one way or another, don't have many thoughts on that. You do run into the problem of religious belief. So in that sense, it's I guess the churches should have considerable leeway there. I mean, on the other hand, there's certainly plenty of lesbian and gay couples out there that make responsible parents. I don't think there's any question about that. Again, you got these things kind of in a kind of a balance there. And I guess the real issue is, do you want the federal government coming in telling church groups how they can act? And I don't know what kind of leverage the federal government would have, and that's what Obama had, I suppose. I mean, you're going to take funding away from a church? I'm not certain there are that many churches that get funding. You're going to give them some other sort of sanction. I don't know. But obviously, Trump, the religious groups, are going to support Trump pretty strongly, I think, and probably more strongly than they did last time, because he has again and again stepped in to prevent the government from insisting that church groups have to do this or have to do that.
Reminds me of the time in high school wanting to get my birth certificate from Hornell City Hall. Forget what it was for, but anyways, they had the heck of a time finding it, and I eventually said to the clerk, I knew I was a black market baby. With that, I better go.
Might as well take your birth certificate with you, buddy.